everyone. Welcome to another edition of PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. And in today's video, we now reach the conclusion of the Vigilante arc for My Hero Academia Heroes of the Morphing Grid. What If Deku Was a Power Ranger? Part 20. Now, with the mark of Part 20, this now concludes the end for the Season 6 portion of the My Hero Academia story. And as you all know, that will officially have this story caught up until when we get Season 7. Now, word is we're supposed to be getting Season 7, I think either sometime this year in October, November, or at the very least in the earlier parts of next year. Now, the story is going to continue. Seeing how much you guys have been into it, there's no doubt about that. The story will be continuing. I just don't know when. But for now, I want to say thank you to all of you who have been supporting this story way back last year and some change ago when we first started. Seeing how far it's come and to see you guys still show the love and support for this thing, it truly means a lot to me. I'm thankful for all of you, for all of my fans. And like I always say, I can't do it without you. You make the channel grow. You make the core grow. But anyway, without further ado, let's get into today's video. So as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. The citizens that were huddled together inside of the fortress that was UA Academy were a little less than thrilled to see Izuku standing there. The crowd, all in a frenzy, yelling and screaming in protest for the boy to leave. They believed that the boy being here signaled the doom of Japan, the end of everything as they knew it. Many screamed for their old lives back, many wanting things to go back to the way that they used to be. Of course, for Izuku in that moment, he felt the overwhelming pressure to want to run. It wasn't because he lacked faith in his friends. It was simply because Izuku never wanted to be a burden to anyone. However, almost as if they knew what he was thinking, all of his friends formed a protective wall around him. They weren't going to let him go. Not when they had gotten him back. The teachers and staff watched on as well. Midnight, who was still recovering a bit from some of her injuries, watching on. The students were going through so much, especially Izuku. Had the teachers failed as heroes? Looking back, what more could have been done? Ever since the first Nomu attack on UA, it felt like their grasp was slipping. Before they knew it, the students were taking more and more of an active role. Now, with the introduction of the Power Rangers and their abilities, along with the many secrets that came with One for All, many of the faculty and staff in UA began to question themselves. How much of a burden had these students been holding on to? How much had they been fighting? They were supposed to guide the next generation. Had they even done a good job at that? They were asking children to fight on the front lines. It was expected of heroes, but even still, a society that encouraged children to get involved in such conflicts, you couldn't help but wonder, were they making the right decision? Had they made the right decision at every turn? It led them to second-guessing everything. Of course, as the people continued to yell and to scream, despite the pleas of many of the pros, they soon saw that it was time to let the children be the ones. Uraraka, using her quirk and taking a megaphone, would fly high into the sky above everyone, yelling and getting all of their attentions. She was able to craft a tale, one that put them all at ease. It would allow them to at least tolerate Izuku's presence. However, there were those that simply could not see to reason. Uraraka explaining that They were the ones that were fighting. They were giving it their all. In the end, UA was not just a safe haven for the civilians. It was their home, a home that they were welcoming to everyone. Many suggested that he go to Shiketsu or another high school. But finally, an older man wearing a yoga t-shirt would step forward. The old man's name was Pratama. He was, for a lack of a better term, a fossil. He'd been around since All Might's very beginning, and even a bit earlier before that. The older man would command attention as he tapped his cane on the ground, yelling for everyone to be quiet. And his commanding voice, despite his age, had everyone standing in attention. I must say, if this is how my countrymen act, then I must say, it is truly shameful. What has this generation turned to? There was a time I remember when we took pride in the heroes that defended us. We gave them the reverence and the respect that they deserved. But now look at you all. You cower and huddle away like little children running from a bad storm. A bad storm, like all others, in time shall pass. But it can never be the way that things are now. I remember when All Might first appeared. He was a legend, far greater than any hero that came before. And even still, I saw that he exceeded even my expectations. All Might was truly a symbol of peace. He ushered in a golden era, an age of security and of comfort. A comfort that we have all taken for granted. We shelved all of our burdens, our anxieties, our fears onto the shoulders of one man alone. And now you are all preparing to make the same mistake with yet another, and to one so young. Tell me, how long will you be okay with just being the spectators? The heroes that fight, they fight to defend all of us. Yes, they receive the glory and the honor, and in the troubling times, many have hung up their capes. But yet for the ones that remain, why do we turn them away when we need them the most? Yeah, and what would you suppose be done? Would you rather all of the heroes leave? Then we would have nothing at all. In the end of the day, a hero is human. Flesh and blood like you and I. How many heroes sacrificed being with their families, their loved ones, many of whom they have lost in this tragedy as well. However, they do not get the luxury to hide in comfort, to shield themselves from the cold rains and from the harsh winds. Despite everything that's happened, despite suffering as much loss as you or I, they still walk out into the line of fire, not knowing when each battle may be their last. Well, I, for one, am not going to allow this cycle to continue. These children, they are the future, a future that must be cultivated. If not, then all is lost. Many in the crowds would be silent, having heard the old man speak. What he said was reasonable. Of course, there were many that still had their concerns, but others chipped in as well. If the kid was just given a few days to rest, just to get back on his feet, he could keep moving again and be a lot more effective. It was a lot better than just allowing him to run himself ragged into the ground. How selfish should they be? As the people slowly began to change their tune, Izuku heard the cries of his mother, as well as seeing the hybrid fox woman that he saved. But more importantly, both Kota and Eri would run through the crowds, jumping into Izuku's arms, the two crying happily to see that their friend, their hero, was safe and was back at home. In the meantime, once Izuku was welcomed back into the UA dorms, he was immediately stripped of all of his dirty clothing and thrown into the bathhouse, where he would be scrubbed and washed until all that dirt and grime went away. As everyone was relaxing, there was one question though. You see, in the heat of the moment and everything that had been going on, there was one clerical error that had been overlooked. Why was Mineta here? Now, pause on the story. First off, may I say, I have some of the best fans around when it comes to Power Core, because the fact that you guys were able to remember details to the story that even I forgot, and this is my fault because I didn't rewatch my own stories to see what I had done before making the continuation of the story. I forgot that Mineta left Class 1A and I had him show up in the last part, so now I have to try to justify what happened. So here you go. And again, guys, if I ever slip up like this in the future, do not hesitate to call me out, because if y'all don't remind me, half the times I'm gonna forget, so I appreciate it. So here's the official reason why Mineta is back in Class 1A. Following the events of the war, many of the heroes and students alike ended up dropping out and leaving for their own safety. While Mineta did move to general studies, he didn't completely give up on his idea of being a hero. However, he just didn't think he stacked up. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that Mineta and Dinky Kaminari are still friends in this universe. So, when Melissa was going over the plans of giving morphers to Class 1A, they realized they were going to need one more student, and Dinky just happened to suggest Mineta. While Mineta did have his reservations at first, knowing that he would get cool ranger powers that could augment and work with his quirk, as well as give him an extra layer of strength and protection, was all of the convincing that he needed to join. So because of that, he was allowed to join back with Class 1A yet again. However, his role in this version of events is still the same as before, not overly all that big, but again, I needed someone to fill that Power Rangers Dino Thunder blue spot, and Mineta was the first one that came to mind. So there you go, that's your explanation. As the students would take the time to rest and to recover, many conversations would be had amongst the group of Class 1A. For those that were already Rangers, they were pretty much in the loop about everything that was going on, but it was the others who hadn't been Rangers that had to be brought up to speed. Izuku would tell them the story of how he met Alpha, how Alpha came from another dimension, and how Izuku found Alpha, who had the 7 original Mighty Morphin Power Ranger morphers stored inside of him, and how Izuku and Bakugo would pick students from Class 1A to be Rangers. Now, of course, there was a little bit of resentment here. After all, seeing who ended up being chosen in the first place, there were some that questioned why they weren't chosen instead. It was nothing personal or anything like that, and it wasn't like they made the decisions lightly. They just ultimately ended up picking the students that they thought would be best equipped to handle the power at the time. Although ultimately, all of Class 1A had now become Power Rangers, which is something that Izuku wondered. Melissa, who was enjoying a cup of coffee after having spent countless hours in front of a computer, would explain to everyone along with Alpha how they were able to make more morphers. Well, it actually happened because Alpha has a lot of Ranger data stored within himself on a lot of different Power Rangers, a lot of different teams, since he had a lot of time to learn information while he was held captive by Lord Draken. Now, the thing is that tapping into the morphing grid is a very, and I mean very, difficult thing to do. It's not something that can be taken lightly. Alpha and Melissa had to work overtime, reverse engineering their own morphers just to create more morphers that could be capable of tapping into the morphing grid. When they first did this, it's how they acquired the alien ranger powers from Aquitar that were used by Shinso and other members of Class 1B. However, even still, those paled in comparison to the morphers that were made now. The one thing that Melissa learned was that when it came to looking through different ranger teams and what powers could have been used, there was a lot that had to go into it. For example, even though she had data on the Mystic Force Power Rangers, in this world, magic just simply didn't exist and wasn't even a concept. So sure, they could probably get the mystic powers, and through using that, they might be able to get magic. But in the end of the day, the biochemistry of what makes the magic morphers work wouldn't be compatible for quirks, unlike the regular Power Ranger powers that they had. In the end, some Ranger powers were just easier to use than others, and because they already had the standard type for dinosaurs, creating other morphers that were based around the dinosaur aesthetic was the easier and faster way to go. Also, because of all the work that had to be put in, the morphers that were made now were the last ones that could ever be made on Earth. Trying to get morphers for the rest of the members of Class 1A, the remaining 14 students, it required a lot of money. Now, UA and Principal Nezu were able to get a lot of funds, given all of the work he does for human rights activism, along with other feats that are recognized by entities all around the world. And Melissa had help from those at I Island, that's run by her father. However, even with all of the help that they had, making these morphers more or less could set back a country for who knows how many long lengths of time. So safe to say, the morphers they had now were all that they could use. They all had to be specially encoded and encrypted to make sure that villains couldn't steal or use them potentially. So safe to say, the morphers that they had now, the current Rangers that they had in this universe, they were the only ones that were ever going to exist, at least by Melissa's calculations, until they could drum up what would be enough funds and materials to make new morphers. Not repair any of their morphers. Making repairs was one thing. Building new morphers, that was an entirely different ballpark. They would have to make do with what they had. And also, whatever resources didn't go into morpher maintenance, it went into other areas. With everyone now having Ranger powers, Melissa was able to take them to the special tower that was in the center of UA's campus. As they went inside, they would go underground, where they saw firsthand what was waiting for them. Zords. Zords upon Zords. More Zords than you could ever imagine. All a variety of colors, shapes, sizes, a multitude of dinosaurs. Izuku was in awe seeing all of this. He saw all 4 of the red Tyrannosauruses standing together. He saw multiple versions of the pterodactyl, the stegosaurus, along with others. A group of triceratops in one area, 2 blue and 1 pink. There were even now 2 saber-toothed tigers, yellow and green. And the white tiger. And Izuku came face to face with his own, the Dragon Zord itself. Melissa was really happy with this. All the effort and work that she had put into to get these things built and to be ready to be used and operational were definitely worth the cost. Izuku was amazed to see how much work Melissa had put in to making all of these, to see the work that everyone was doing. Izuku was beyond relief and beyond ecstatic. The doors would open as All Might would walk in, holding some important papers. You see, All Might hadn't been around in a bit. He still felt bad about how much pressure he had put on Izuku, and a chance meeting with the hero killer of all people ended up opening his eyes, as well as getting some much needed information on the whereabouts of All For One and the League of Villains, as well as what they would be up to. All Might would walk to Izuku, the two embracing in a hug and both apologizing profusely. For All Might, he was grateful. Even despite everything that happened, the relationship between master and student had never been stronger. Young Midoriya, All Might would think, despite everything you've gone through in your life, you still look up to me. You still wish to keep me around. I am your master and your teacher, and I promised that I will see you through this journey till the end. You inspired me never to give up, and because of that, my fighting spirit has been renewed. The bond between master and student couldn't be more solid. For all of these students, he was proud of them, and he was going to watch over them. Izuku would ask what was in the briefcase All Might was always carrying around with him. Melissa would smile. You don't know, Izuku? Come on, Uncle All Might. Don't you want to show him? All Might didn't want to show off or anything, but he could at least reveal what was in the case. All Might would open it, revealing a gem, a black gem. In the meantime, Mr. Aizawa would be awakening from the hospital. Out of everyone on the raid team, he was the one that suffered the most. Thanks to Mirako being partnered with Shinso and Shinso using his ninja or ranger powers, Mirako avoided having her leg and arm taken from her against the Nomu. So the rabbit hero, despite getting a haircut, was still in tip-top shape and ready to go. Meanwhile, he ended up losing a leg and having his eye partially damaged. However, the prosthetic he was given was working just fine, although he felt like he wasn't going to have the spring in his step that he used to. That was until Nezu, the principal, would have a box delivered to him. As he opened it, inside was a device, along with a white gemstone. A Dino Gem, to be more specific. Series White and Series Black, the final two in production. They had to pick which ones would receive the powers. After all of the students who were going to get theirs already had them. The first one to be chosen was, obviously, All Might, and the other, the teacher who had been leading them and would continue to lead them. Mr. Aizawa clutched the stone tightly. It was time for the heroes to make their comeback. It was time for them to make their stand. In the meantime, the other pros would begin deciphering the messages through the data and the paperwork that they had recovered from the hero killer's stain. In doing so, it was fortunate that the Rangers were back together, because they had learned something rather terrifying. The time they thought they had to hunt down All For One before he had reached completion, it was not what they had thought it to be. They didn't have a month. At best, they had 3 to 4 days. The Council of the World were gathering together. Of course, the situation in Japan was bad enough, but it had potential to become a global catastrophe. This was one of the issues with Hero Society. Legislation, things of that nature. It was hard to get anything done. However, there were some heroes who ignored the bureaucracy. The United States was all too aware of this, as their number one hero was already taking off, heading to the land of the rising sun. The hero known as Star and Stripes. Seeing as how her master had called for any assistance that could be granted, how could she ever ignore the calls for her greatest hero? Her, along with a coordinated military jet squad, set off for Japan, ready to intercept All for One. Dr. Garaki lied in the prison cell. He had already been through interrogation, and the power that he had given himself to use the ooze had been put into a regressed state. Of course, the doctor wasn't too worried about this. He had played his role, although he was worried about one thing. You see, it wasn't the young master who was fighting for control from All for One. The morphing grid has two sides. Where there is light, there is also darkness. A congregation, if you will, of pure evil. All of those who have been defeated by the Rangers, where do their consciousness go when they're destroyed? Evil, whether it be organic or machine, those who seek destruction and chaos, they go to a dark side of the morphing grid, a dark zone, a place where their evil is kept contained. However, once you're able to learn how to navigate the morphing grid, when you're able to learn its intricacies, you can go into these dark places, and from them you can pull out great power. It's how they were able to enhance the Nomu, using fallen monsters to amplify the strength of the high-end Nomu. It's how they were able to make a Nomu Goldar in the first place. But there was one being whose evil far surpassed any other. An evil who at one point in time was the greatest foe the Power Rangers ever faced. His evil was so strong and potent within the darkness of the dark grid that it almost invited All for One. Even in his own consciousness, All for One had to admit, in the presence of this evil, even he was a bit shook. It was none other than Lord Zedd. Lord Zedd had spoken to All for One. He was willing to reveal many secrets, all in exchange for one thing. He would grant All for One the power that he needed, the hatred that he required to steal One for All. All he wanted was a seat inside. He wanted a chance to see it, the destruction of the Power Rangers. All for One was more than happy to grant him that, for everything he had given him. But there was also something else. You see, the current Psycho Rangers needed to fill out the team. With the death of Twice, they had to find a replacement for Psycho Silver. But all of the other Psycho positions were filled, all except one. Just as All for One needed a body made for his consciousness, another body was being made for another consciousness to be uploaded inside. And wouldn't you know, she just so happens to be ready to awaken at any day, at any moment. Inside of a cryostasis tube, the silhouette of a young, beautiful woman takes form. As she does, sparks of yellow shine and emanate all around her. If Lord Zedd was the king of evil, then what is a king without his queen? What Lord Zedd asked for in return for his help wasn't just a spot inside of All For One's consciousness for a chance to watch as the Rangers are destroyed once and for all. He wanted the consciousness of his love to be restored and to use the power of Psycho Yellow. This was the dawn of darkness, for what loomed on the horizon was the resurrection of the Queen of Evil, Rita Repulsa. This concludes My Hero Academia Heroes of the Morphing Grid. What if Deku was a Power Ranger? Part 20. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we continue Naruto DxD. What if Naruto was in high school DxD? Heroes Return, Season 4, Part 5, the finale of the Kyoto arc. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with Power Core Productions and Podcastings. Signing off, and I'll see you next time.